So why should women want an end to feminism?
Well, I think it's a bold statement that women want an end to feminism, but I think it's sort of backed up by, polls are sometimes untrustworthy, but there's been some interesting ones. The YouGov poll in the last 2 years suggested that there was only about 30% of men and women who identified with the label of feminist, and a Fawcett Society poll back in, I think it was 2016, put that figure at about 7 or 8%. So if you go up to a woman on the street and you say, what is your burning issue? What is the thing that you politically identify with? It's very unlikely that she's going to say feminist. And I think that's because feminism has not become something that isn't political. It's become an identity that you kind of wear as a badge. It's a bit vacuous. It doesn't actually have any sense of women's freedom and liberation anymore. And so I think it's time to dispense with it and to come up with a better way of arguing for the kind of freedoms that women are still withheld from, and argue for a better means of women's liberation.
Do you think you could argue that people don't want to identify as feminists because of a demonisation of the feminist in media?
I hate this argument, which is when people say, but you really are a feminist, don't you get it? Because, the dictionary definition says that feminism is about equality of the sexes. And that's actually what the Fawcett Society did when its press release, when it ran its headline about that very low number of people who are feminists. It said, we are a nation of hidden feminists. And what that essentially is saying is, no, you stupid person, you don't know what you mean. I know what you mean, and I'm actually going to correct you with the right terminology. And that's kind of a key reason why I really feel quite strongly about the problems with feminism, because it's not simply about the equality of the sexes. It's not about denigrating men, and I don't want to go down that route, but it's about treating women as victims. Instead of arguing for women's freedom today, feminism argues for women's protection, and that's a completely different thing. Being protected and safe is completely different from being free, which inherently involves risk and excitement and challenges. So if we really want women to be equal to men, which I think we should want, then you have to start arguing for the different F word, freedom, rather than feminism, because it just isn't serving. So, you can dress it up how you like. You can call it equality feminism, you can call it professional feminism, blah, blah, blah. It still is the same thing. And at its heart, it's about protecting women rather than making them free.
So do you think there's a way that you can recognise inequality without that then putting onus on those that are unequal? So sort of naming inequality between men and women. Could that's sort of taking agency over that inequality rather than it being like we're victims of it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, calling stuff out as it happens. I mean, for example, in this country, one of the main ways in which women are still treated differently to men is through abortion law, which stipulates that our bodies, men don't have any rules and regulations into what kind of healthcare they can get or at what point they get stopped from having healthcare. We do. Once we become 24 weeks pregnant in this country, then our bodies are no longer our own. We're not able to do anything about the fact that we might not want that pregnancy anymore. And that's, it gets played down. It's actually a really important thing to say. Hang on a minute, women are not equal because their bodies are owned by the state under the current law. Call that out. That is an inequality. There's a huge amount of sexist law surrounding contraception and the regulation of that, which treats women as not being able to make up their own decisions. But what you do is you find the root of what's actually going on there. And what's actually going on there is a disbelief in women's agency. It's not just the patriarchy, this kind of free-floating spectre that no one can actually pin down. It's a system of, it's capitalism, it's the world in which we live, it's the laws in which we've created. Outline what actually is going on and tackle that. Don't engage in this kind of free-floating, I don't want to use the word circle jerk, but people have used it, of kind of, self-congratulation about victimhood. I think we need to get a bit more proactive.
Is this a sort of recent phenomenon in feminism? Like, do you see this in sort of the 1960s or 70s? Is this a problem with feminism today or just inherently within feminism?
Well, so in the book, What Women Want, I focus in on contemporary feminism and its issues. But actually, if you look back at the kind of the movements of the 60s and 70s, while much of it was very good and very forthright in arguing for sexual liberation, access to contraception, arguing for women's rights in an equality within the law. What also happened was there was a move towards that kind of cliched phrase now, the personal is political, and that idea that, some people even argue that feminism is the original identity politics, in which it said that everything about a woman's experience in life is coloured by the fact that she is a woman. And so that's come to its logical endpoint today, in which you have, speaking as a woman, that kind of approach to politics, which is really narrowing and really it places constraints on women's ability to engage. So actually what we're seeing today has been there in the kind of theory of the anti-porn feminists, Dworkin and McKinnon, in the the kind of books like Our Bodies, Ourselves, which were part of the feminist movement, which said, women have to really be obsessed with themselves and argue the fact that their bodies, their personhood, their identity is the political thing. So we're seeing a culmination of that today, but it's been coming for a very long time.
And so the title of your book, What Women Want, is it ironic? Because that still seems that you're talking from a very woman's perspective, as if women know best about these issues, and it's just an issue for women.
Well, I mean, there are certain things in which women will have a better answer to certain questions. So, for example, in this country, still is the fact that women, though there's no official regulation around it, women are still the ones who are the primary caregivers. We wipe the snotty noses, we take the time off work when kids get sick. It's a social norm. It's not necessarily we're not tied to the kitchen sink, but we haven't exactly managed to escape it either. And so women talking about that experience is a pretty good thing. But I also think men can have that conversation as well. Childcare should not be an issue just for women. It should be an issue for society as a whole. But the reason why I called it What Women Want, it was actually, rather than it just being a nod to the Mel Gibson film, it was about saying that, drawing attention to the fact that feminism today often talks about how women feel and what women's emotions are, and professing from on high about what women need, this law to protect them, that man to shut up, all that kind of thing. And I sort of realised no one is asking women what they want. I mean, does your average working class woman living in a London want the same things politically from Theresa May, Emily Thornberry, a CEO who's a female? No. And so we need to look at what it is that actually women want, have those questions, have those open questions, because actually sometimes the answers might be not what today's contemporary feminists like. So some women like catcalling and like being whistled at. Some women want to be stay-at-home mothers and be the only ones who cook the dinners. There's a variety of an opinion here. We have to actually get together and say, what is it that women want and need, defined by women, rather than being defined by a very small section of middle-class journalists and politicians with a policy to grind.
So do you think feminism has been elitist?
For sure. I call it in the book, I call it a middle-class girls' club. And that wasn't me just being nasty. It's actually, it's what it has become. I mean, if you look at, for example, the kind of contemporary feminists who are active in the media and in politics, I mean, there's a huge amount. Feminism is always on the front pages of newspapers. We're saturated in it. We're always talking about it. If a politician wants to get a little bit of kudos, all they have to do is start up a question about quotas, so that it's there. And yet it's have the lives of average women like myself been changed? Not necessarily. We've got more women in Parliament thanks to Blair's injection of the Blair's babes and the Women's Equality Commission calling for more quotas. Has anything happened in relation to abortion rights, better provision for childcare? No. And so it's about saying, drawing attention to the fact that a certain section of women, middle-class women, have done pretty well. Women in their 20s and 30s actually are, of a certain section of society, are out-earning men. They're benefiting from this kind of politics. Is your average working-class woman benefiting from this? And the answer is a resounding no. So, yes, it is an elitist project, and I'm having a good time trying to tear it down.
Yes, I would love to hear. So then where do we go from here? Sort of how do we tear it down? Is it through making politics more representative, or do we need a movement which isn't elitist? Which which route are you taking?
I don't want to see someone once suggested to me, well, we'll have, quotas for different sections of society, women put on a board, so we'll have your mother from a Tottenham estate come on to a citizens' assembly along with the black academic female. And, it's not simply a question of representation. It's about a different approach to politics, which puts liberation and freedom first. And as you can see with any other discussion going on, whether it be Brexit or any kind of issue of British politics, a belief in people's ability to enact change and freedom of speech and individual autonomy and agency is at an all-time low. So I think it has to be part of a wider discussion about how do we value freedom, how do we value choice. There are practical things that we could do tomorrow. We could scrap the 1967 Act and the Offences Against the People Act and just take abortion out of criminal law. Done. We could do that tomorrow and it would change women's lives irrevocably. We could make childcare a provision in the same way as the NHS, and so you just eliminate that kind of gender imbalance that happens and still happens in many homes. There are practical things that you can do, but I think the problem is not necessarily at the moment simply one of policy. It's about a kind of having a step change in the way that we look at politics, doing away with the identity politics of feminism, and not to keep pushing the book, asking what do women want, what is it actually that we need and want to be free in 2019 and 2020, because I don't think that the current badge of feminism is doing that a service.
And how do we create a system in which, if we're asking what women want, that is then fed into how the country's ruled?
Well, I mean, that's again, it's not, having a female prime minister, would that do it? It hasn't. Having a board of females on a company like Facebook, would that make it a better place? No. There's a kind of inherent strange obsession with the idea of women and femininity, that simply having a woman there makes the world a better place, which is actually a kind of sexist view of us having this kind of like gentle touch and having different qualities to men. So it's not simply about just changing the face of politics. It's actually kind of a far more complex about saying, I think that actually there needs to be a lot more solidarity between men and women, certainly working class men and women, because they have much more similar interests. If two people living on the estate that I grew up on will have, a man and a woman, will have almost everything in common. And in comparison with, a woman living there and a woman living in an Islington townhouse, we're not going to have a huge amount in common, really, are we? Other than the fact that we both have vaginas, and what does that matter to my lived experience? So it's about growing solidarity between people in and expanding the question of freedom outside of the kind of gender sphere, outside of the identity politics sphere, and saying, okay, so you want to be treated equally in the workplace and you want better pay, like for the pay gap example. All right, let's argue for that, and let's argue for the male cleaner over there who's getting paid pennies to do his work. Let's come together and, without sounding sort of like fairy tale, make society a better place, rather than just sort of the obsession with the gender wars at the moment is doing no one any good.
And moving on to, you've spoken a lot about Brexit. That was a situation in which people were asked what they wanted, and we're seeing that now. But you've talked a lot about how it's a sham. Why do you think that? Well,
I almost feel like I want to whisper this. I think probably the only Brexit voter in the festival, I think that it's a terrible and wonderful example of the problem with politics today. You have a clear mandate from a mass vote, biggest mandate in British political history. Do this, and politicians absolutely will not do it, and will do anything but do it. And it's, I for years have been banging on about elitism, about the differentiation between us and them, about class prejudice in society, and here you have it writ large in the reaction to Brexit. You have a mass vote that is denied by an elite, and so not exactly half and half, but part of me is saying this is the most terrible thing ever to happen. I wish it hadn't happened, and half of me is saying, okay, it's out there now. The lines are drawn. It's very clear. We're in a better place potentially to build something different, because they can't hide anymore. It is explicit that we are living under a government and under the rule of a ruling class that's hostile to democracy. What an exciting thing to try and change.
So you think this could be remembered as a time being broken down to show how we're ruled, to then build it up again?
I think that there's a potential for what I would hope would be a kind of left-wing populism to galvanise on the ability of, the fact that you've had a mass sentiment for a desire for change within a populace. I mean, people forget that British politics is, by and large, kind of like it's relatively hostile to change. I mean, certainly in the last 30, 40 years, we've had little to no change. And we've used to worry about questions of apathy and people not being engaged. Suddenly you have a mass movement in society that says we want change. Not only do we want change, but we want it even if it's going to hurt us, even if there's going to be risks, even if there's going to be economic upheaval. God, what an opportunity to really implement something different and, rip up the rule book and start again. So rather than being beaten down by the torrent of rubbish that you get of anti-Brexit sentiment, anti-working class sentiment, prejudice that's going on in attack to Brexit voters, I kind of want to say to those of us who believe in democracy, both Leave and Remain at this point now, as I'm stealing from Claire Fox now, but she stole it from Michelle Obama, like kind of when they go low, we go high. I think looking at the fact that there's such an opportunity now, ignore all the crap and let's just push forward and not waste this opportunity.
And do you think the Labour Party's in a good position to be able to do this?
I have so much contempt for the Labour Party, it boils up inside me like vomit, because Jeremy Corbyn could have been someone who, because he was a very strong Eurosceptic, could have galvanised that opportunity to push for what from my point of view would have been a really kind of clear statement of democracy, leaving the European Union and pushing for different step changes in relation to the House of Lords or the monarchy in the country. And he squandered it. And not only has he squandered it, he is being played by a party that is so hostile to democracy, it's unbelievable. Whether it be Lord Adonis saying that if you're a Labour Leave voter, don't vote for us because we don't care about your vote, to Keir Starmer, Chuka Umunna, who's now left, or David Lammy, calling Brexit voters racist. I mean, this used to be a party that claimed to be on the side of the working class. It is now a party that is explicitly got the interests of the establishment at heart and is set against the working class. So I hope Labour goes to hell very quickly and very soon, because I'm so utterly ashamed for that party for ever being able to claim that it was on the side of the masses.
And so who would you like to see as leader of the country?
Do you know what? The Brexit vote was the first time that I ever positively voted. I always used to spoil my ballot. And I just voted in European elections, which was the second time I've ever positively voted for the Brexit Party. Theresa May going, I don't care who's going to be the Conservative Prime Minister. I mean, pick me someone who you would trust out of Labour or Conservative to deliver Brexit properly now. And I don't mean putting forward the deal. I don't mean, doing some kind of Frankenstein's monster Brexit, but to actually implement a no-deal Brexit, to get out of the European Union, and then to take the country into a different kind of more progressive area of populism, galvanising populism rather than being scared of it. There's none of them who can do it. And I've always had a sort of, it's not a cynicism, but it's a kind of truthful understanding of the fact that the political establishment, Labour and Conservatives, you couldn't fit a cigarette paper between them on many things, because we've become now just dominated by the kind of boring managerial centrism. Having said that, I think that, the fact that Brexit has happened shows that actually people can do things that are a bit radical and a bit dangerous and a bit, challenging the status quo. I'm hoping that with the, local elections showing a surge of independence, and with the, the new success of the Brexit Party, though not necessarily that party, that different elements are going to start coming into politics. We might see some new faces, we might see some new ideas. That's an exciting prospect.
Feminists have a lot of people that get a lot of time in our pop culture today. I wonder if you have alternative people who you look up to who could be alternative role models for people.
Well, there's one from history and there's one from now. So the one from history is Sylvia Pankhurst, who never really gets mentioned in discussions around the suffragette because she was the scruffier sister. She did terrible things, like went to the East End and talked to the working class, and that wasn't, the other Pancras didn't like that. And she was anti the war, but she put forward a really strong point of view, an incredibly radical point of view at that time, which was saying that we must demand freedom with no ifs and no buts. So it's not just suffrage for women, but it's suffrage for all people of adult age. She was universal suffrage. She was arguing not just for women to get the vote and then vote in for some kind of status quo politician, but to drastically change the world as it was. She was she was arrested most, she was attacked most, and yet she stayed strong in a time in which women were really denigrated. So anytime it gets hairy for me, I always think of Sylvia and think if she was able to put forward such radical points of view under the kind of constraints that she had, then I can, with a bit of abuse from Twitter or something like that. I think that we should be celebrating Sylvia more than any other suffragette. But the one in recent history has to be Claire Fox, who's the director of the Academy of Ideas. And it's not that she talks about feminism all the time, but I think as a woman who explains her point of view so clearly and so forcefully and without restraint, it's a kind of, I want to see us, rather than celebrating, Beyonce or Michelle Obama, or even though those women are great and interesting in their own right, celebrating the idea that women should be, a little bit out there, a little bit forceful, and taking up space in a genuine sense. And I think that Claire Fox has been someone who's had more attacks and abuse than most, but is one hell of a woman. So I look her up and look up the Academy of Ideas.
For more debates, talks and interviews, subscribe today to the Institute of Art and Ideas at IAI TV.